Welcome, my beautiful people, to another episode of Dino Basics, where we dig up the basics on some of our favorite deceased beasts. My name is Logan, and today we shed some light on a creature that may actually be thankful for its extinction, so wouldn't have to bear witness to just how much its name and legacy would be dragged through the mud. While the mighty Mesozoic dinosaurs are often the first to come to mind when mentioning extinction, other now extinct animals have still been able to resonate with the modern public, and be almost reborn in our modern media. Some of these include the towering woolly mammoth, the savage saber-toothed cats, and of course, today's topic, the chubby little avian, the dodo bird. Now, if it were not obvious, the dodo bird is a unique case for the Dino Basics, in that the dodo actually lived alongside humans during a time in which science, history, and documentation was becoming a more significant matter in human culture. For that reason, the documentation on its discovery, interactions, and final days have a lot more first-hand accounts to pull from, rather than the speculative hypotheses of dusty old bones from millions of years ago. To make things easier, we will begin by explaining what a dodo is. This helps the dodo's history and extinction to make more sense later on. Cool? Cool. The name for the dodo is a surprisingly complex issue, with conflicting sources and a lot of back and forth. I know what I just said about documentation, but I promise stuff later on will be more straightforward. The earliest names for the creature stem from Dutch, who called them Valgvogel. I won't even pretend that's accurate. A combination of the Dutch words Valg for tasteless or sickly, and Vogel for bird, roughly translating to tasteless bird. Other accounts provided additional names like Dronte, meaning swollen, Griffint, roughly translated to griffin duck, and Kermisons, meaning fair goose. Obviously, none of these names stuck. The modern scientific name, Raphis cucullatus, has its earliest roots dating back to Spanish Jesuit Juan Eusebio Nuremberg, who would provide the scientific name Syngus cucullatus, while the genus name would later be changed to Raphis, as an allusion to another group of largely terrestrial birds called bustards. The specific name cucullatus would stick around. This name can be roughly translated from Latin, meaning hooded. This was meant to reference the artistic works of Carolus Clusius, of which Nuremberg called out the head and beak of his dodos being very hood-like in appearance. The name dodo, meanwhile, is an informal name assigned to the creature and popularized by the general public, similar to how most people would call this a wolf rather than a Canis lupus, or a cat rather than a Felis catus. A few plausible origins have been provided over the years for where this name comes from. Some have suggested Dutch origins, such as dodor, meaning sluggard, as a reference to the nonchalant nature around humans, or even dodars, meaning fat arse or nod arse, which, yes, does sound like the Baroque equivalent of a sick burn, but would actually have referenced the knot of feathers at their tail end. Others suggest Portuguese origins, with the leading theory that it could originate from the word dodu, meaning fool or crazy, once again referencing their lax attitude towards humans. Unfortunately, early classification wasn't any easier. Due to its bizarre appearance and flightlessness, how to group such a creature baffled many early scientists. Despite its flightlessness, the creature was clearly a member of the birds, or avian, grouping. Meaning, on a technicality, the dodo is still technically a dinosaur, ensuring our post-Cretaceous creatures on the Dino Basics still live up to the show's name. What do you mean we covered a monkey? Some of the earliest suggestions included everything from a small ostrich, a grouping of waterfowl called rails, an albatross, and even some type of vulture. But the seemingly most odd suggestion, proposed by Danish scientist Johannes Theodor Reinhardt in 1842, was a pigeon. Yes, this thing may be related to this. Reinhardt was mocked for his suggestion, but later analysis of the leg bone, skull construction, and beak all showed a significant amount of anatomical similarities, helping to prove Reinhardt's seemingly outlandish theory. For many years, the dodo would exist in its own family called the Rhaphidae, but studies as recent as 2024 have since abolished the family, and instead grouped the dodo under the same family as pigeons, called the Columbidae, while creating a new clade within this family for the dodo and another large flightless bird called the Rodriguez solitaire. And before you ask, that has nothing to do with the card game. Naming this clade the Rhaphidae. Based on descriptions from the original explorers, as well as some subfossil remains and remnants recovered in the 17th century, the dodo was a fairly large bird, estimated to reach just about 3 feet or around a meter in height. Weight estimates have ranged from 20 to 60 pounds, but it has been suggested that this weight difference could merely be seasonal change, with individuals having more fat stores during the colder seasons and shedding this weight as the temperature becomes warmer. In comparison to their bodies, the skull of the dodo was exceptionally large for a bird, and especially a pigeon, with some specimens able to reach lengths of about 8 inches or around 20 centimeters from the back of their skulls to the tip of their beaks. Nearly half this skull length would be dedicated to the featherless upper bill, but only the last few inches would actually make up the keratinous beak, leaving the rest to be composed of flesh and bone. This beak would hook downward and be fairly sharp, useful for cutting into the thick skin of palm fruit, nuts, seeds, and possibly crabs that these creatures would feast on. While their greenish beaks would be useful in breaking open the tough skin, contemporary sources claim dodos would use gastroliths, or gizzard stones, to grind up this food. Gastroliths is a digestion method where animals will swallow smooth rocks to sit in their stomachs, and as food comes in, the rocks will grind together and help break down the material, rather than relying on teeth in the jaws to process food. Their necks were notably well developed, displaying obvious points for muscle and ligament attachments. This strength would be necessary to help support their large skulls. Their overall body and bone makeup was very robust, with the most obvious example being their pelvic elements, as well as their yellow legs and black claws, being much thicker than other birds to support their heavy weight. This heavier weight would factor into their flightless nature, their bodies being much too heavy to take to the skies. Their wings, while small, were likely not completely useless due to muscle scarring in recovered specimens. While flight was obviously a no-go, it is believed dodos would still use their wings for courtship or to intimidate rivals. Like their avian relatives, dodos would be covered in a thick plumage of feathers. While no feather specimens remain today, descriptions claim the plumage would be a brownish-gray color, with a tuft of lighter grays at the tail. Some early sources claim of a distinct species of white dodos that had lived on nearby islands, but this has since been owed to inaccurate paintings from the 17th century, as well as confusion with another group of extinct birds, the Réunion ibis. A 2002 study of the lineage for the dodo revealed that the closest living relative to this bird would be the Southeast Asian Nicobar pigeon, a larger species growing up to 16 inches or about 40 centimeters in length. Around 23 million years ago, a group of these dodo ancestors would diverge from their lineage and through island hopping moved further and further southwest, until some time after 10 million years ago, stumbling upon the Mascarene Islands, an archipelago just east of the island nation of Madagascar. For the next few million years, these pigeons would flourish on the island, free of any large predators to hunt them and lacking any competition for food with mammalian herbivores. Due to these factors, the dodos would grow in size and lose their ability to fly to better compete with the smaller terrestrial and avian herbivores native to the island, and fill the niche left open by this mammalian absence. This competition was largely limited to a few species of birds, like parrots, parakeets, ducks, and pigeons that had not abandoned the ability of flight. While, as previously mentioned, few large predators would colonize these islands naturally. For terrestrial animals, the 3-foot or 1 meter long round island burrowing boa was likely the largest among the islands, while the Mauritius owl, measuring about 2 feet or just about half a meter long, would be the largest flying carnivore of the region. Neither of these predators were likely able to hunt a fully grown dodo, and instead would have to settle for the young, injured, or old to stand a chance. The dodos were believed to have lived in the drier coastal forests in the south and west of the Mauritius Island, one of the largest islands in the archipelagos. Their strong legs likely made the creatures fairly agile and maneuverable, especially among the dense foliage comprising the pre-human landscape. As a flightless bird, the dodo would nest on the ground, and by some accounts would produce a single egg during the breeding season. Due to this small clutch size, dodos would likely nurture their young excessively until they matured, which, based on later studies, was likely fairly short. Some estimates argue baby dodos would reach near adult size in as little as 4 months, from August to December. The island ecosystem was certainly incredible, but also very fragile. With the limited resources of food and territory, it was a delicate balance for each species to live in harmony, and the dodo was a crucial element of this stability. Some scientists argue the dodo helped spread the seed of the tambalacoke tree, as the now rare tree saw a stark decline after the elimination of the dodo. Furthermore, certain species of parakeets and other flying birds were believed to rely on the dodo to break open and process larger fruits and nuts, after which these birds would eat the leftovers or whatever is left after the dodo has processed their own food. Without a strong ability to fly or swim, dodos were highly reliant on this equilibrium to ensure their limited population could thrive. But unfortunately, stability isn't exactly guaranteed in nature. So for the next few million years, the dodos would flourish in this isolated paradise, safe from mainland predators and significant competition. That is, until 1598. In this year, the Dutch East India Company would first arrive on the island of Mauritius, the island which dodos were native to. Mauritius and the other Mascarene Islands would serve as a resupply port for trade vessels. Around this time, Asian trade with modern-day Indonesia and India was still extremely lucrative in Europe, and the fastest way to reach this region was sailing south of Africa, a trip that could take between 6 to 8 months to complete. So these islands served as a useful stop for resupplying on the long voyage, either to or from the region. The earliest accounts would be provided during the Second Dutch Expedition to Indonesia, led by Admiral Jacob van Neck. These descriptions were not scientific articles, and simply the journals of explorers and traders, so of course, these reports seemed only interested in how these jumbo chickens tasted. If you're curious, by the way, apparently many travelers found the meat unsavory and somewhat tough, with many preferring to eat the native pigeons and parrots instead. But one advantage to eating dodo was its portion size, as the journals mentioned a single dodo was too large for a single serving, and could fill multiple seamen. Don't take that the wrong way. Additionally, dodos were easy to catch, with some reports claiming entire flocks of dodos would be herded onto ships to be eaten on the voyage at a later date. While the dodos would take millions of years to reach these islands and evolve into their distinct appearance, their time with humans would be a short one, and this exposure would ultimately spell their doom. The last widely accepted sighting of a dodo bird would be in 1662, and while a few additional sightings would be reported over the following years, this date has largely been accepted for the date of extinction for the dodo bird, a mere 64 years after human settlement began. A few live specimens were transported off the island during these years, some reaching as far as Japan, but they were often just brought as gifts rather than any attempt to preserve the species, so they would either die on the voyage or pass away from age, with no chance to carry on their lineage. Overhunting by these Dutch traders is often blamed for the extinction of the dodo, but many modern historians dispute this. I mean, it's not like overhunting has ever caused an animal to go extinct. Except for the passenger pigeon, and the thylacine, and the stellar sea cow, and the great auk, and the Javan tiger, and the moa. But that's definitely it. While there is plenty of evidence of hunting by these traders, and apparently even a bloody Yelp review on how they taste, archaeological studies of the island have shown little evidence of mass human predation. Furthermore, the population of the island throughout the 17th century never exceeded 50 people. And again, it seemed likely sailors and traders preferred other food sources on the island besides the dodo. But this does not absolve humans, not by any means. A larger contributing factor was what humans brought with them: invasive species. Dogs, pigs, cats, and rats all would destabilize the fragile, isolated ecosystems the dodos once thrived in. Cats, dogs, and rats would all raid dodo nests, as their ground-based nesting and clutches of a single egg made them extremely vulnerable, devastating future generations. Meanwhile, pigs would compete for the limited food sources on the island, reclaiming the niche of a medium-sized herbivorous mammal that the dodo had been filling for millions of years. This is probably a good point to disprove a few stereotypes regarding the dodo. One commonly held belief is that dodos were stupid, owed largely to their lack of fear for humans, making them easier to hunt. This is likely incorrect. As we mentioned before, brain-to-body ratios prove its intelligence was likely similar to that of a pigeon. Again, not a high bar, but could be worse. A more probable explanation for this behavior would be their lack of predators. This phenomenon is called island tameness, or in a broader sense, ecological naivete. This is the tendency of highly isolated animals to lose their wariness of large predators due to consecutive generations having no exposure to them. A good example of this is the Hawaiian goose. This species shows no signs of wariness around large mammalian animals not native to the island. This is not because they are dumb, as the species is still extremely wary of native predators like the Hawaiian hawk. Instead, it simply has no reason to be fearful of humans, so it will simply act passive or even curious. Many species of penguins act in a similar way, particularly those near or in the Antarctic. Terrestrial mammals don't live on the southern continent, so these penguins have no precedent of whether these weird hairy things are a threat or just a neutral party. Another commonly held belief was that the dodo was clumsy or sluggish, and likely would inevitably go extinct due to its own inadequacies. Many expressions like dead as a dodo or to go the way of the dodo illustrate this point, referring to something that is outdated or obsolete. These beliefs are also incorrect. The strong legs and pelvis provide evidence that dodos were excellent runners, and well adapted to support their weight in the dense forests and rocky terrain of their homes. While some may point to their flightlessness and lack of obvious defenses to reinforce this false narrative, in reality, it simply was highly specialized in its extremely unique environment. Other highly isolated animals, such as deep-sea fauna like some anglerfish, have similar disadvantages, such as blindness. Not because they are outdated or inferior, simply because their unique circumstances allowed them to adapt and change in fantastical ways. More competitive or quote-unquote typical environments may not allow for. Whether their absence was inevitable or not, despite its limited exposure to humans, these creatures had a profound impact on the general populace, enough to make them a cultural phenomenon for centuries. As early as 1865, the dodo would appear in Lewis Carroll's classic stories, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, where Mr. Dodo Dodson, full legal name Charles Ludwig Dodson, respect where respect is due, would interact with Alice and other fantastical creatures of Wonderland. On its former home island of Mauritius, which is now an independent nation, the dodo would appear across various objects and symbols, like their coat of arms, on specific coins, and even the watermark on all rupee banknotes. As for more recent media appearances, the dodo remains one of the most prolific prehistoric animals in media, aside from the dinosaurs. So trying to name all of their appearances would be nearly impossible. I'll just highlight some of the more obvious. In 2015's video game Ark Survival Evolved, the dodo has become something of an unofficial mascot, being one of the earliest animals tamed by new players for its resilience, personality, and being one of the few animals that doesn't have at least 7 different ways to murder you just for glancing in its general direction. The dodo would also appear in everything from documentaries like 2014's National History Museum Alive, animated films like 2002's Ice Age, television series like 2008's Primeval, additional video games like 2007's Zoo Tycoon 2, and even animated television shows like 2007's Phineas and Ferb. While the dodo is the butt of plenty of jokes today for its goofy appearance, its story is, in truth, a tragic one. This was a creature that once thrived, uniquely evolved to suit its isolated island home. Strange by our standards, perhaps, but perfectly adapted to a world without predators. It was ultimately undone by the careless actions of those who sought only to exploit it, never pausing to consider the consequences of their presence on just some silly bird. But that's exactly why we should remember and even celebrate this silly bird. Not just because it's funny, and believe me, it's very funny sometimes.
There goes our last female.
But because the dodo stands as a reminder of what can happen when we act without thought for the wild world around us. Maybe if we do, we can avoid such tragic loss in the future. That's gonna do this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to leave a comment below what you think of the dodo, and if you've heard of this creature before the video. I'm almost certain you guys probably have, but I need to ask anyway just to push the engagement. You know the drill by now. But anyways, we'll be off next week, and when we do return, we look into the basics on a scientist often overlooked in terms of their contributions to the scientific world, but oddly enough well recognized among those who want to sell seashells by the seashore. It's of course the prolific female paleontologist, Mary Anning. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next video.